For more than 4 centuries, the Han Dynasty ruled China. It expanded its borders, strengthened centralized rule, and built systems of governance and trade that would influence East Asia for 2,000 years. It was not fragile. It was an empire, and yet, by the late 2nd century, it began to fracture. Not from invasion, from erosion. Power inside the imperial court shifted to rival factions and eunuch officials. Young emperors were manipulated. Political purges became routine. Loyalty grew conditional. Beyond the capital, heavy taxation and land consolidation devastated rural communities. Floods and droughts were not seen as weather, they were warnings. In traditional belief, disaster signaled the loss of the mandate of heaven. And when people believe heaven has withdrawn legitimacy, rebellion is no longer treason, it becomes correction. In 184 AD, a religious leader named Zhang Jiao led what became known as the Yellow Turban Rebellion. Drawing from Taoist teachings in the Way of Great Peace, he rallied tens of thousands across northern China. Imperial forces under generals such as Huangfu Song moved to suppress the uprising. The rebellion was crushed, but something fundamental had shifted. The illusion of centralized control had fractured. 6 years later, in 190 AD, warlords formed a coalition against Dong Zhuo, who had seized control of the imperial court and relocated the capital to Chang'an. The empire was no longer confronting unrest at its edges. It was unraveling at its center. At Hu Lao Pass, coalition forces attempted to break Dong Zhuo's defenses. Historical records describe failed advances and staggering bloodshed. The dynasty was no longer fighting insurgents. It was fighting itself. What follows are fictional confessions set inside documented battles. The events are real. The locations are real. The names remain in record. The fear was real. The blood was real. Our first account comes from Guangdong County in 184. This is the confession of Shu An. He remembers the sermon before Guangdong. Story 1. The Sermon Before Guangdong. I have told this story in pieces, the way men admit to rot by confessing the smell before they name the wound. A detail here, a sensation there, always stopping short of the center. Even now, years later, I still catch myself choosing softer words, as if the truth can be dulled by careful speech. My name is Shu An. I was a junior infantry officer in the Han Imperial Army, born in a wheat village south of Yingchuan. My father counted grain for a magistrate. He believed in ledgers, the way others believe in gods, because a ledger at least can be checked. When I was 13, he took me to a clerk's desk and showed me how to hold a brush so the lines stayed straight. He said a man who can write can survive famine, bandits, even war, because someone always needs a record. When I was 18, the record I was ordered to keep became a list of the dead. In the spring of the Jiazi year, the roads filled with people who wore yellow cloth around their heads like a second skin. At first, we called them peasants with more anger than sense. Then the reports came. Entire districts refusing taxes, granaries broken open, magistrates found in ditches with their seals taken. They called it the Way of Great Peace. They said heaven had changed its mind. I had grown up hearing old men talk about omens, about comets and dry rivers and children born with teeth. I never paid them much attention. When my mother's cousin died of a cough, no star had announced it. When a neighbor's barn burned down, it did not mean the dynasty was ending. It meant someone dropped a lamp. That was how I learned to think. If I could touch a cause, I could accept it. Then the rebellion spread and the causes multiplied until they stopped being touchable. Our commanders spoke of sorcery, of charms, of sickness carried on breath. They said the rebel leader, Zhang Jiao, could cure illness with water and words. They said he could command men with a sentence. They said he had promised the poor that the Han had lost heaven's favor, and the poor had listened because they were tired of waiting for favor from anyone. General Huangfu Song marched north with the discipline of a man who had spent his life correcting chaos. He did not speak of magic. He spoke of supply lines, fortifications, and the need to end the rebellion before it became a memory people could hide inside. He was strict, but strictness in that season felt like a railing on a bridge. I was assigned to his army because I could read, because I could write, and because I was young enough to carry a shield without complaint. My unit was a mix of conscripts and hardened men from garrisons, the kind of soldiers who had spent so long guarding borders that they had forgotten what they were guarding. My direct superior was Captain Liang of Yingchuan, a narrow-faced man with a scar on his upper lip that made it look like he was always suppressing laughter. He never laughed. Shu An, he told me on the second week of marching, you will keep the tally. You will write the names we can identify, and the numbers we cannot. You will not decorate the page. We are not poets. I agreed. I meant it. When we entered Julu Commandery, the air itself felt different, not because the wind changed, but because the villages did. There were fewer dogs, doors hung open. Patches of farmland sat unworked as if the soil had been abandoned by agreement. In some places we saw yellow cloth tied to tree branches, fluttering like small flags. No one stood beneath them. It was like passing through a land that had decided to stop being seen. 2 days before we reached Guangzhong County, an officer from the forward scouts came back with his horse foaming, the animal's flanks slick and trembling. He dismounted and stood at attention, and I remember thinking that he looked like a man who had stepped out of deep water. There is a gathering, he said, before the walls, not inside the county, outside. A field. They are not armed like an army. It looks like a sermon. The word sermon felt wrong in a military tent, but no one corrected him. General Huang Fusong listened without moving his face. Then he gave a simple order: disperse it before nightfall. No one wanted a crowd of rebels on the road before a siege. Crowds turn into shields. Crowds hide knives. Captain Liang was told to take 300 men. I was among them. We marched out in the late afternoon when the sun had already begun to soften. The light in Julu can be pale even on clear days, as if the sky is conserving itself. The road to Guangzhong was lined with trampled grass and the remains of makeshift camps, ash pits, broken pots. A child's wooden toy horse with one leg missing. These things, small and ordinary, were what unsettled me most. An army can destroy, but a movement can abandon. Abandonment leaves objects behind, like bones. As we approached, I heard it first, a sound that did not fit the distance. It was not a shout. It was not the roar of a crowd. It was a hum, low and steady, like a drum struck softly over and over from far away. The men around me heard it too. Their shoulders shifted under their armor. Spears tightened in hands. Someone coughed, and then held the cough back, as if afraid the sound would offend the air. Captain Liang raised a fist, and we slowed. We crested a small rise, and the field opened below us. I had expected motion. I had expected scattered groups, running, yelling, people turning at our approach. Instead, there was stillness. Thousands of figures stood in rows, not rigid like soldiers, but arranged as if the field itself had placed them there. Yellow cloth wrapped their heads. Some held staffs. Some held nothing. Many had bare feet. The ground was uneven, and yet their lines were straight. At the center, on slightly higher ground, stood a platform made of wooden planks. It looked hastily built, but it did not wobble. A man stood upon it. He was not tall. He was not armored. He wore plain robes that moved gently with the breeze. His hair was bound, his face pale. In the dimming light, I could see that he was thin, too thin for a man who was supposedly the center of a rebellion. He looked like someone who had been sick for weeks and still refused to lie down. Zhang Jiao. I knew his face from crude sketches passed among officers. The sketches made him look like a demon with wild eyes. The man I saw had eyes that were calm. That calmness was like cold water. The hum I had heard was coming from the crowd. Not one voice, not 1,000 voices, but the blending of all of them. A sound that did not spike or dip. They were chanting words I could not separate. Captain Liang gave the order to form. Shields up, spears forward. The men obeyed, but the movement was slower than it should have been. I told myself it was because we were moving downhill. It was because the air was wrong. We advanced. No one in the crowd ran. No one threw stones. They watched us like people watching a cart roll past on a road, expressionless and patient. Zhang Jiao lifted one hand, not dramatically, simply as if he was asking for quiet. The hum did not stop. It deepened, settling into my chest like something heavy placed there without permission. He began to speak. I expected shouting. I expected the kind of fervor that whips poor men into madness. Instead, his voice carried like a well-made bell. It was not loud. It was clear. It cut through the hum without breaking it. I could not tell you his exact words. That is the part that has haunted me more than any battlefield memory. I heard him, but I could not hold the sentences. It was like trying to catch water in a net. Captain Liang shouted, "Advance!" The word should have snapped through us like a whip. It did not. It hung in the air and then dissolved. I tried to repeat it, to help push it forward, but my tongue felt thick. The hum pressed against my teeth. The chant from the crowd began to match my breathing. And once that happened, I noticed something else. My men were breathing in time. A soldier beside me, Private Sun from Runan, reached up and untied his helmet strap. His hands moved calmly, as if he was preparing for rest. He lifted the helmet off and held it at his side. His eyes stayed forward, unfocused. "What are you doing?" I hissed at him. He didn't turn. He didn't respond. Another man lowered his spear inch by inch until the tip pointed at the ground. Not dropping it, not surrendering, just lowering it, like a tool no longer needed. I looked back up at the platform. Zhang Zhao's face was turned toward us, but he did not seem to be looking at Captain Liang or at the line. His gaze was wide, as if he was seeing past us, through us, into something behind. The sun slid lower. The light changed, and with it, the field seemed to flatten. The edges of things lost sharpness. The line between the crowd and the earth blurred. I realized with a cold pulse of panic that I could not hear the wind anymore. The only sound was the hum, and his voice woven through it. A thought came into my mind with the certainty of a memory. We are wrong to be here. It did not feel like a belief. It felt like a fact, like the weight of my own name. I have heard men speak later of persuasion, of being convinced by argument. This was not that. There was no argument. There was only the sudden sense that the world had always been this way, and I had somehow missed it until now. I tried to force the thought away. I tried to remember my father's ledger, his insistence that causes can be checked. I tried to think of pay, of duty, of punishment. The thought remained, unmoved. Captain Liang shouted again, louder. "Advance! Break them!" The word break did something to me, not the way he intended. It made me think of my village, of cracked earth during drought, of a jar dropped on stone. It made me feel, absurdly, that the Han itself was cracked, and that we were marching to pretend otherwise. My hand loosened on my spear. It was small, that loosening, but I felt it as if I had unfastened a belt in public. Zhang Zhao's voice continued, calm, unhurried. The crowd's chant rose slightly, not in volume, but in presence, like a tide reaching my ankles. Then, one of our men kneeled. It was not dramatic. He simply sank down, as if his legs had remembered something older than training. He placed his spear carefully on the ground and bowed his head. Two more followed. I heard someone behind me whisper, "Heaven has changed." I turned and saw Sergeant Chiao, a hardened border soldier whose hands had cut throats in the north without trembling. His eyes were wet, not from fear, from relief, like a man hearing a sentence and finally understanding it. My heart began to hammer. I knew, suddenly, that if I did not do something, I would kneel too. The thought of kneeling felt like warmth. That was the most terrifying part. It felt like rest. I drew my sword half an inch. Steel whispered against scabbard. The sound was wrong in the field. It was too sharp, too clear. It drew Zhang Zhao's gaze fully onto me. And in that moment, for the first time since we approached, I felt seen, not judged, not threatened, recognized. I cannot explain what that did to me. It was like someone calling my name in a crowd and me turning instinctively, except he did not call it, and yet my body responded as if he had. My knees softened. I began to lower myself. The shame of it came after. First came the impulse, clean and immediate, like hunger. A shield slammed into my face. White pain burst across my cheekbone. My eyes watered. My teeth clicked hard enough that I tasted blood. I stumbled back, shocked into wakefulness. Captain Liang had hit me with the rim of his shield. He leaned close, his scarred lip drawn tight. "Zhu An," he snarled, low enough that only I could hear, breathe out of rhythm. I did not understand. Then I realized I was breathing with the chant. I forced myself to inhale sharply. then exhale quickly, breaking the pattern. Again. Again. My lungs burned. My heartbeat stuttered. The hum did not vanish, but it loosened its grip on my chest. Around me, chaos began, not from fighting, but from disintegration. Captain Liang shouted orders, and some men obeyed, while others seemed not to hear. Soldiers stepped forward into the crowd with empty hands. The crowd parted to receive them, gentle as water. I saw Private Sun walk away from our line, helmet in hand, expression blank. A yellow turbaned man reached out and took his shoulder, guiding him as if guiding a child. Sun did not resist. He did not look back. Captain Liang grabbed my arm. "We pull back," he said. "Now." I wanted to argue, to insist we could still disperse them, that this was a trick. But my throat was tight and my mind was filled with the aftertaste of that warmth, the desire to kneel. The fact that it had felt good made me nauseated. We retreated uphill, dragging men who were still coherent, leaving behind those who were not. No arrows followed us, no stones, no pursuit. The crowd simply continued chanting as the light died. From the rise, I looked back. Zhang Zhao still stood on the platform. His posture had not changed. His voice carried, calm and steady. The field was now a sea of yellow heads under the darkening sky. Our men among them were indistinguishable at that distance, swallowed by the crowd like ink in water. That night, back in camp, General Huang Fusong listened to Captain Liang's report with a face like stone. He did not accuse us of cowardice. He did not speak of magic. He ordered extra watches, tighter lines, and a dawn assault. I sat by a fire and wrote a list of names. Captain Liang dictated those he knew had walked into the crowd. Private Sun, Sergeant Chow, and 16 others. The ones whose names we did not know I marked as unknown. My brushstrokes shook. Captain Liang sat beside me, silent for a long time. Then he said, "We do not speak of what happened, not to the men, not to ourselves." "Was it sorcery?" I asked, hating myself for the question. He stared into the fire. "It was something," he said. "If we give it a name, it becomes a place to hide. At dawn, we stormed Guangzhong. That assault was real war, the kind that can be counted. Arrows, fire, shouting, men dying in ways that make sense. Yellow turbans fought fiercely, not as peasants, but as a force that believed it could not lose because heaven was on its side. Our men, angry now, terrified now, broke them with steel and numbers. We entered the county. We burned storehouses. We took prisoners. We killed those who resisted. I never saw Zhang Zhao again. Imperial records later said he was ill, that he died of sickness during the campaign. They wrote it cleanly, as if a man like that could die quietly in a bed. Perhaps he did. Perhaps the rebellion needed him alive in stories longer than he could remain alive in flesh. Perhaps our commanders needed him to die of illness, so that the army could say it had defeated rebellion, not belief. I tried to accept the official account. I wanted to, the way a tired man wants to accept the first bed offered. But there were things that would not settle. After the assault, when the county was secured, I walked outside the walls alone. The field where we had seen the gathering was torn up by feet and stained dark. Bodies lay scattered, many with no wounds, as if they had simply fallen and stayed down. The wind moved through the grass. It should have sounded like the world returning. Instead, I heard it, faintly, a hum, not from many mouths. The field was empty. The hum was in the air itself, in my memory, in the rhythm of my breath when I wasn't paying attention. That night I slept and dreamed that I was standing again on the rise, looking down, and Zhang Zhao turned his gaze to me. In the dream I kneeled and felt relief so deep it made me weep. I woke with tears on my face and my hands clenched as if holding a spear. I told myself it was exhaustion, hunger, fear, a trick of mass chanting, a symptom of war, like the way some men hear drums long after the march ends. Years have passed since Guangzhong. I have stood in other battles. I have watched men die and written their names, the ones I could identify, and marked unknown for the rest. I have seen rebellion flare and die like grass fires. I have heard priests and officials both tell the people that heaven favors one side or another, because favor is a tool men use when they lack bread. None of it has frightened me the way that dusk frightened me, because on a battlefield, The enemy is outside you. Even fear is your own. In that field before Guangzhong, I felt my will loosen as easily as a strap. I felt the comfort of surrender. That is what I cannot forgive. I do not know if Zhang Jiao worked magic. I only know that for a moment I believed him, and I have never trusted my own thoughts since. Story 2. The Man Who Would Not Fall. My name is Zhao Ming. I was 26 when we marched toward Hu Lao Pass with banners snapping in the spring wind, and I believed, like most men believe before their first true slaughter, that courage was a choice you made with your chest. I thought fear was something you could swallow, the way you swallow bitter medicine, grimace, and move on. I did not understand then that fear can be structural, that it can live inside an army the way rot lives inside a beam. You can paint the beam, you can hang silk from it, you can swear an oath beneath it, and still one day it will break. In 190, the world felt as if it had tilted. Dong Zhuo had taken the capital, and the boy emperor had set himself between the Han and its own heartbeat. Court officials who spoke against him vanished. Ministers were executed. The capital was emptied, then moved west to Chang'an, like a hostage dragged by the wrist. We heard stories of Luoyang burning. We heard stories of palaces stripped, of bells melted for coin, of the city's walls watching smoke rise like a slow prophecy. The coalition formed because warlords saw a chance, and because lesser men like me saw a cause. Yuan Shao's messengers traveled to provinces, carrying proclamations written in clean calligraphy that spoke of restoring the Han, of ending tyranny, of righting the world. I had been a garrison man in my youth, posted along river roads to deter bandits. I was not noble. I was not from a great house. I could read, barely, and write well enough to sign my name. My father had been a cartwright. He built wheels. He taught me to examine axles for hairline cracks, because a cracked axle could kill a family on a mountain road. When I joined the coalition, I told myself I was joining to restore the dynasty. The truth, if I speak it plainly, is that I joined because I wanted the world to make sense again. A man like Dong Zhuo should not be able to seize the heart of the empire, like a fist closing around a candle. If he could, then nothing was firm, nothing was safe, and my father's careful wheels, my mother's dried grain, my own small efforts were all built on air. So I marched. Our army was large enough to convince itself it was righteous. We had men under Yuan Shao, men under other lords, and their banners filled the horizon like a moving forest. Drums beat. Officers shouted. Cooks yelled at boys to carry water. Horses screamed when they smelled other horses. The ritual of war wrapped itself around us, and inside ritual, men feel protected. You begin to believe that pageantry is the same as power. As we approached Hu Lao Pass, the land tightened. Roads narrowed between hills. The terrain itself began to funnel us forward, and that funneling is what made the pass terrifying even before we saw it. A pass is not simply a gate. It is a decision made by geography. It tells you where you must go, and it tells your enemy where you will be. Hu Lao was a wall cut into the world. Stone and timber, towers rising from rock, the gate mouth dark even in daylight. When we first came within sight, some men cheered, as if seeing the enemy's stronghold meant we were already winning. Others fell quiet. I heard Captain Shen, a veteran from the north, mutter, "That place is made to swallow men." My unit was assigned to the forward push during one of the coalition's attempts to pressure Dong Zhuo's defenders. We were not the first wave. We were not the last. We were the kind of men commanders spend when they are testing a wall, seeing where it yields, seeing how much it costs. I was an infantry officer, a small title earned through stubborn survival and an ability to keep my men in line. My superior was Commander Wei Rong, a broad-shouldered man who wore his armor like a second body. He had once fought border raiders and carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed every threat could be measured and answered. The night before the engagement, we camped on uneven ground outside the pass. Fires dotted the hillside. The air smelled of pine sap and cooked millet and horse sweat. Men spoke in low voices, not because they were afraid of being overheard, but because the pass itself seemed to demand quiet. In our camp there were stories, always stories. Soldiers trade them the way traders trade salt. They passed among the tents like rats. Dong Zhuo has a demon in armor, one man said, laughing too loudly to mask his fear. They call him Lu Bu. He kills without tiring. Another said, he does not sleep. He eats raw meat. He drinks wine mixed with blood. Someone else, older, shook his head. All men sleep. All men eat. A blade can take any neck if it finds it. I wanted to believe that last sentence. I held it like a charm. Commander Wei Rong gathered us and spoke plainly. Tomorrow, we advance in order. Shield wall intact. Do not break formation for anything. Do not chase. Do not admire. You obey the drum, and you obey your neighbor. If you separate, you die. The men nodded. Some smiled. Men smile at rules because rules pretend to be protection. I lay awake that night listening to distant sounds. Somewhere far off, perhaps inside the pass, a horn called once and then went silent. I listened to our horses shifting in their tethers. I listened to the murmur of men whispering prayers. I thought of my father inspecting axles with a lantern, calm and methodical, and I tried to summon that calm. I told myself, a fortress is a structure. An army is a structure. A man is just a man. At dawn, drums began. Not ours at first, then ours, then a rhythm that seemed to come from the hills themselves, as different units answered one another. Banners lifted. The ground shook with movement. The air filled with the smell of sweat, already rising from bodies. We advanced. From a distance, a mass of men moving looks like a single creature. From within, it feels like hundreds of small lives trying not to be trampled by the same cause. The front ranks set their shields. Spears angled forward. The line held. It felt good. That moment when you can see your own discipline made visible in wood and iron. Then the gates of Hu Lao opened. I do not mean they cracked open slowly, the way a gate opens for a parade. I mean they moved with sudden purpose. Wood scraped stone, and the sound made my teeth hurt. The mouth of the pass revealed darkness behind it. A cheer rose from Dong Zhuo's defenders, harsh and brief. Out of that darkness came a single rider. At first, I did not understand why the sight unsettled me. One rider is not an army. One rider is a messenger, a scout, a fool. But this rider did not move like a scout. He came out as if the space belonged to him. His horse was large and dark, and it moved with a controlled violence. Hooves striking stone and then dirt, each impact sending small sprays of mud. The rider's armor caught the weak morning light in flashes. He carried a long weapon, not a spear exactly, not a simple halberd, something heavier, a blade meant to hook and tear. I could not see his face clearly. Distance and movement kept him blurred. The details that should have formed a man did not settle. It was like trying to focus on a hawk in flight. Commander Wei Rong shouted, "Hold, hold the line." We held. The rider approached, and the air changed. Not because of magic, not because of omen, but because men's bodies responded before their minds did. The front rank tightened, the second rank leaned back a fraction. A ripple of hesitation passed through us like wind through grass. Then the first impact came, and it was not steel. It was momentum. The rider hit our forward edge, and men collapsed backward as if struck by a wall. Shields turned inward. Spears lifted too high. The formation bent around the point of impact, the way a woven basket bends when something heavy is dropped into it. I saw one man lift his shield to strike, and then disappear beneath the horse's chest. I saw another reach for the rider's leg, and lose his hand. The movement so fast, it looked like a gesture of surrender. Someone screamed. Someone else screamed over him. The rider moved through our line, not by cutting a path like a farmer cutting wheat, but by forcing space. Wherever he turned, men stumbled away or were thrown aside. It was as if his horse carried a denial of resistance. The air around him seemed to reject cohesion. Close, surround him, officers shouted. Coalition soldiers tried. They stepped in, spears angling, shields pressing. Surrounding requires agreement. It requires men to believe their neighbors will hold. It requires the kind of calm that only exists before a line is broken. But cohesion was already failing. A man to my left, Private Han, raised his spear, then glanced back. That glance, that single backward look, was enough. He shifted his feet to adjust. His heel slid on mud and blood. He fell, and the men behind him stumbled. and suddenly there was a gap. The rider took the gap as if he had been waiting for it. I saw the blade come down. I saw a shield split. Not crack, split. The wood separating as if it had been sliced by a saw. The man holding it dropped to his knees with a sound that did not belong to human speech. His helmet rolled, and I saw his eyes for an instant, wide and shocked, and then the horse stepped on his chest, and the eyes went empty. I stepped forward without thinking, because stepping forward was what training had taught me to do. My shield met someone else's shield. My spear jabbed. I do not know if it struck flesh, armor, or air. Everything became too close. Mud sprayed my face. The smell of blood rose hot and metallic. Men's bodies pressed against mine. I heard the sound of breath inside helmets, harsh and panicked. I heard someone coughing and choking as if drowning. The rider passed near enough that I felt the air split by his weapon. A gust, sharp, as if a door had been slammed near my ear. The blade did not touch me. It struck the man in front of me. His head snapped sideways, and for a heartbeat he remained standing as if nothing had happened. Then his knees folded and his body slid down, leaving a warm spray across my arm. I froze. Not for long. Freezing in battle is a luxury, and the world punishes luxuries quickly. Someone collided with me and pushed me forward. My feet slid. I almost fell. I caught myself on a body. It was Private Han, the one who had fallen. His mouth moved. No sound came out. His eyes were fixed on my face as if he wanted me to remember him properly. I tried to pull him, but his armor was tangled beneath other men, and the pressure of bodies was already pinning him. I looked up. The rider was turning again. He was within our line, inside us. The thought came with a sick clarity. He is not outside the shield wall. He is inside it. When that happens, a shield wall is not protection. It is a trap. Back. Reform, Commander Wei Rong bellowed. But reforming requires space. Space was gone. Men began to retreat in small pieces, not as a unit. 1 step here, 3 steps there, a sudden turn. Each retreat created gaps. Each gap became an invitation. The rider moved like he could sense those gaps, like he was reading our fear as if it was written on the ground. I slipped. My boot slid on blood. Not enemy blood. My own unit's blood. The stone beneath was slick, and for a moment I felt weightless, as if the earth had decided to stop holding me. I fell hard on my side. The impact drove the breath out of me. Pain flared through my ribs. I tried to stand. A horse passed close enough that its flank brushed my helmet. I smelled sweat and animal heat. I heard its breath, quick and loud. Its hooves struck stone near my hand. I pulled myself back, scrambling like a child. My dignity vanished. The world became survival. I survived because another man was struck in front of me. That is an ugly truth. Men like to believe survival is earned, that there is honor even in retreat. Often it is just arithmetic. Someone else takes the blow. You do not. As I crawled, I saw faces, too close, distorted by fear. A man's mouth open in a scream that never finished. Another man, staring upward, as if watching something beautiful. Someone's hand reaching, grasping at air. The horn sounded retreat. A long, aching call that should have meant order. Instead, it sounded like confession. We were retreating from one man. The thought was so humiliating, I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell myself we were retreating to regroup, that this was strategy, that any commander would do the same. But the truth was visible in the way men moved. They moved as if fleeing a wildfire, as if the air itself behind them would burn. We pulled back, stumbling over bodies, over broken shields, over spears snapped like dry reeds. Men dropped their weapons to run faster. Officers screamed at them and were ignored. When we reached a safer distance, where the rider did not immediately follow, the line tried to reform. The survivors clustered together, panting, eyes wide. Commander Wei Rong stood with his sword drawn, his chest rising and falling. Blood streaked his armor, not his own. He looked like a man who had been struck in a way that did not leave a wound. "Hold," he said, voice hoarse. "Hold." The rider stopped near the edge of the field, turning his horse in a slow circle, as if surveying what he had done. The movement was calm. There was no frenzy, no rage, just control. Then he rode back toward the gate. As he passed through, Dong Zhuo's men cheered again. The gates began to close behind him. The sound of wood on stone carried across the field like laughter. Only then did someone near me whisper, "Lu Bu." The name fell into the air with weight, as if naming him completed the disaster. I stared at the gate, at the seam of darkness, disappearing as the doors met. In that moment, I understood something that has never left me. A fortress can be beaten. An army can be reorganized. A war can be won or lost. But morale, once broken, does not return to its original shape. It returns warped. That day we attempted further assaults, smaller pushes, probing attacks. We sent champions and units, trying to regain the sense that the field belonged to us. But the memory of that first breach lived in our bodies. Men tightened their shields too early. Men flinched at shadows. Men listened too hard for the sound of hooves. At night in camp, the talk changed. It was no longer about restoring the Han. It was about surviving the next day. Men began to speak of Lu Bu the way farmers speak of storms, not as an enemy to defeat, but as a force to endure. I sat by a fire with my hands shaking and tried to write a list of casualties for my commander. The brush would not stop trembling. Ink splattered. I wiped it and tried again. Private Han's name appeared in my mind like a knock on a door. I wrote it. Then I realized I did not know if he had died. I had left him pinned beneath bodies. He could have lived. He could have suffocated. He could still be there, buried under men who also might still be alive, breathing in darkness. The thought made my stomach twist. In the days that followed, the coalition's unity began to show cracks. Different lords argued over strategy, over supply, over who should take the lead. Men who had sworn to stand together began to suspect each other. That suspicion is another kind of enemy. It eats from within. We did not take Hu Lao Pass. We withdrew to reorganize, to argue, to preserve our armies for the larger war that had begun. History will say many reasons for our withdrawal: logistics, politics, the difficulty of the terrain. All true, none complete. The complete reason was fear. Not simple fear of dying, but fear of collapse. Fear of watching your formation unravel and realizing that discipline is fragile, that it depends on belief. I had feared death before. Every soldier does. Death is personal. It is a blade, a spear, a fall. What I had not feared, until Hu Lao, was the moment 1,000 men realize at once that they cannot win. When that realization hits, it moves through the line faster than any rider. It turns strength into weight. It turns shields into burdens. It turns comrades into obstacles. It turns an army into a crowd. I left Hu Lao Pass with my ribs bruised, my arms stained, and my mind altered. Years later, I still wake to the imagined sound of wood scraping stone, the gate opening, and the first heavy impacts that were not steel. I never saw Lu Bu fall. I never saw him die. I do not know if he died as men die, in pain and confusion, or if he carried that calm to the end. It does not matter. The thing that haunts me is simpler. I survived Hu Lao Pass, and I learned that courage is not a choice you make alone. It is something an army holds together, the way a wall holds together, and once it begins to crack, you can feel the fracture travel through you even before you see it. I do not fear dying in battle. I fear the moment 1,000 men realize at once that they cannot win, and I fear how quickly, after that, men stop standing. You have reached the end of tonight's battles, the moment where the account concludes, the testimony is given, and the battlefield returns to silence under an open sky, orderly, documented, buried in history. But if anything followed you out of these confessions, if any image lingered longer than it should have, it is because the horror was not myth, it was structural. An infantry officer named Xuan, standing before Guangzhong, watching trained soldiers lower their weapons, not because they were defeated, but because they believed. A coalition soldier named Zhao Ming, holding formation at Hu Lao Pass, only to witness a single rider fracture cohesion and turn discipline into collapse. Because the most disturbing part of war is not always the clash of steel. It is the moment belief shifts. The second when order no longer feels certain. When a system meant to protect you begins to bend under its own weight. When 1,000 men realize, at once, that something has already broken. We are taught to believe in institutions. We believe in banners. We believe in walls. We believe in command structures that stretch upward into something stable. We believe that if the army stands, the dynasty stands. But once that certainty cracks, the structure does not need to fall immediately to be terrifying. It can remain standing, intact, imposing, still issuing orders, and already hollow. Tonight's stories were not about legends. They were about legitimacy and what happens when men begin to question it. Because the most dangerous collapses are not always sudden. They are procedural. A general whose authority depends on fear. A sermon that changes the rhythm of breath. A gate that opens and closes and opens again. So, if you take anything from tonight, let it be this. Do not confuse longevity with stability. Do not confuse power with permanence. Do not assume that because something has ruled for centuries, it cannot fracture in a season. And if you ever find yourself standing inside a structure that feels unshakable, if you ever feel the quiet shift of belief around you, pay attention to the hesitation in the line, to the way men begin to look at one another instead of forward, to the moment discipline feels heavier than surrender, because sometimes the horror does not begin when the walls fall. Sometimes it begins when the men inside them stop believing. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, stories about systems, power, and the quiet points where control begins to unravel. Let me know in the comments which moment stayed with you the longest. The field at Guangzhong, where soldiers knelt without command, or the line at Hu Lao, where one rider turned formation into panic. Like the video so these accounts reach others who still believe collapse always arrives with spectacle, with flames, with unmistakable ruin, and not with doubt. If you have your own experience, a moment where leadership faltered, or a structure felt intact but something beneath it shifted, you can always share it. The business email is in the channel bio. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying with the quiet, documented dread. And until next time, watch the structure, listen to the silence in the ranks, and remember, the most terrifying collapses do not begin with noise. They begin with belief. And remember, the dark awaits.